Welcome to another episode of GQ Speaks, your go-to platform for insightful conversations, captivating stories, and thought-provoking discussions. GQ is a series of experiences, and we're just making sense of that as we go along. That is what we're doing here, one conversation at a time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into our episode.
All right, let's discuss the situation in the Strait with our guest now. Joining me back in the studio is Paul Musgrave, an Associate Professor of Government at Georgetown University.
And let's pick up on points around the ceasefire with Mehran Kamrava, who is Professor of Government at Georgetown University of Qatar.
Abu Dahab, she's a Professor of International Law at Georgetown University and also a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs.
Speak to the author of a chilling economic forecast which outlines the severe impact of a prolonged conflict. Gabor Scheiring, Assistant Professor of Comparative Politics at Georgetown University in Qatar. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Dr. Raha Hakimdavar is celebrated as a member of the Hydro 20 for her pioneering work in space-based hydrology. Through leadership at the U.S. Forest Service, NASA, Georgetown University, and Zion Space.
We decided to reach out to GQ faculty who have been on air to tell us a little bit more about the behind the scenes of the screens that we smile looking at. This episode features Professor Raha Hakimdavar and Professor Gabor Scheiring from Georgetown University in Qatar.
Thing I wanted to say, just a fun fact, is I did not want to study engineering. I didn't want to do any of the things I'm doing now necessarily. I love the environment and I loved water from a young age, but I wanted to be a journalist. So that to me was like the ultimate of being able to bring voice to people that don't have a voice, being able to bring voice and bring a message that is so buried, and it's, you know, people that may be suffering in a place that don't have an ability to voice it or to connect it. And I found that to be just like beautiful and so important. But I feel exactly the same way about actually what I do now about science, in that it's bringing voice to things. I mean, just the language maybe is different. Maybe it's math, maybe it's physics. That's the language that we're using. But you know, I think in the end, everything we do in this world is storytelling, and I take that, you know, really very seriously. I think in how we tell the story, how we formulate, you know, how we tell the voice of the Gulf. It's or how we tell the voice of the mangroves in Qatar. It's the same as how we share the stories of the people that are from the Jordan River Basin, you know. And the story of that water and the history of it, and you know, the challenges it faces, all of that. So yeah, I love this conversation because I think it's very much speaking to the heart of what I've always wanted to do and what I care about.
So yeah, I think I'm somewhat unusual also in the sense that the underlying motivation that drove me to politics, to become a parliamentarian, and the things that motivate me to do social research, those are very closely related to each other. I mean, there are of course differences. When you are politics, you can directly impact, directly change power and decision making. Well, if you are in opposition, not so directly, but still more so than as an academic. But my idea was throughout always to contribute to creating more sustainable, caring, and just societies. And that's what I did. That was the policy focus of my work in the parliament, in politics. And this largely defines the courses that I also teach on populism, on capitalism, even research methods. You know, I teach scopes, which I'm sure is an absolute student favorite. I'm sarcastic here. You know, it's why do we do research? We do research to equip ourselves and equip others with reliable knowledge, and we produce knowledge with a purpose. we don't just produce knowledge for the sake of knowledge. We produce knowledge because we believe it's helpful to make decisions, either in politics or for social actors, companies, movements, NGOs. So it again, I think high quality knowledge feeds back into building a better world.
I think it was a happy surprise. It always makes me very optimistic when I find that stories of war or stories of conflict are also covering the environmental implications, which are very much both, can be the underlying causes, can be used as pawns as well as leverage during conflict, and especially when it comes to water resources anywhere. They are just so fundamental to humanity. They're so fundamental to what we need to live and survive. So when they start to get targeted during a conflict, it's an especially problematic and very troubling issue. But it doesn't always get covered in the news as that. Actually, I remember during the war in Ukraine in the early days, there were a lot of water infrastructure that were, and they continue to get targeted, but that it wasn't really getting covered on the news. I felt at that time in the way that it should have. So for me, obviously, it is. I think it is well recognized that the region that we are in the Middle East, and especially in the Gulf countries, we're highly dependent on desalination. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that they were reaching out to scientists, they were reaching out to the community to have experts that could talk about the implications of that. So not just, these things sometimes get headlines like water is going to lead to conflict. We're going to have wars over water. Okay, those things maybe, but there's a lot of nuance when it comes to what that really means. And so in this case, there was actually a ton of coverage, and a lot of my other friends and colleagues were also doing a lot of media at that time. Some hydrologists, some more policy experts, kind of across the board. But yeah, I was I was happy to see that they were reaching out to what I felt were the right people, and also that they were really trying to understand the implications of that beyond the headline of water infrastructure are getting targeted, crisis. But okay, what does that really mean? And I think I always see these things as an invitation and a really important opportunity for us to also educate the public and communicate, the nuances of these things, that these are risks that we have been thinking about. There's actually a lot that the region has known about these risks, and how many days do we have before the water runs out? What are the implications for food security? What are the implications for actually industry? Because you need water for everything. We need it for ourselves. We need it for our food. We need it for our industry. We need it for our environments. So yeah, I'd say it was just kind of the interest was really very global for sure. And I liked the questions that were being asked. I thought it was really getting to a deeper level than the surface headlines.
Really unique. There were two peaks in my career, both linked to unique political events. One was first was when Donald Trump was elected. And then how does that happen was a question that many journalists in the US asked, and then they reached out to me. So that's when my most kind of prestigious or impactful media appearances took place, Politico, MSNBC, CNN, those sort of things. So that was mostly about explaining the rise of the far right in the US. And then this April we had an election in Hungary, which was really consequential beyond the borders of the country, because Viktor Orbán was in power for 16 years and he became kind of the symbol of the global far right, and he lost the election, and that again generated an extreme interest among journalists. So that was kind of, I think it was April when I had this. Within a few weeks, I had been contacted from all 6 inhabited continents. So that was very intense also. And then earlier, the Iran war also generated another peak. So that's another interesting thing. It's these media engagement as a genre, if I may say so. It comes and goes. It operates in ebbs and flows for most people. Some people, have expertise that can steadily feed into the news cycle, but in other cases, and I think that's the majority, it's really related to specific events.
Mm-hmm. Depends on the question, the topic, the outlet, the medium, the format. So if it's live coverage, it's quite different from when you're doing maybe an interview for a written piece, or if you're doing something that's pre-recorded, or if you're contributing to a piece as an op-ed. So first, I think, as someone that's not a professional in these areas, I've had to learn it as things have come up, best way to prepare for each one. And typically, when there's a recent event that is occurring, and you don't have a whole lot of lead time, so you really have, it's kind of, sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it's with a few hours or the next day. So I think most importantly is just to make sure that you're preparing for the right audience, for the right type of medium, for the right outlet, and all of that. And each one is very different. So I'd say probably for me personally, I have the hardest time with the live TV, the ones where you have to be. And I know some of the other faculty are so good; they're on the news all the time and they're fantastic, But that's something that I feel I need to just become stronger at. And because you have to be very, of course, not necessarily purely rehearsed, but you have to really have your words selected, let's say, and it's tends to be less of a conversational kind of like we're having now, right? Where you can have dialogue, discussion, and I think, for example, it's things we would do more so in a classroom or even in a conference setting. So in that sense, yeah, I think that's quite a different kind of preparation, but in the end, I'd say the most important thing, I take all of these opportunities very seriously, and if I commit to it, make sure that I'm actually going to do it justice. I know the topic well enough. I can really speak to it as an expert, because usually you're being invited as for your expertise on that particular topic. And I need to make sure that I get the facts right. So I try to simplify as much as possible, knowing that, the words can get interpreted in different ways. They can get picked up. Sound bites can get picked up. They can turn into so many things, as taken in sometimes the right way, sometimes the wrong ways, and everything in between. So I really try my best to, do justice to the facts, to the science, to what I feel I know. And to simplify it as much as possible. I think probably the biggest challenge in my field, whether it's talking about space or if it's talking about Earth and water and all the different areas, is that it tends to be pretty technical, but technical things don't translate well for a general audience. And people, I think especially in the news, people need to feel an emotional connection. They need to relate to it. So I think a lot of what I try to do is just to make it digestible, relatable, while scientifically robust enough so that we're getting the facts.
Try to do is with media, you don't want to. Very rarely do you have really the time to get into definitional issues. So, for example, when it comes to populism, you just tend to, and I think most people just tend to kind of go with implicit definitions and kind of a broad understanding that people will roughly associate more or less to the right kind of political movements and people from Latin America through Europe to other parts of the world, right? So Modi would also come to people's mind, or Duterte, or this kind of polarizing figures. But then what I try to do, and that's one of my kind of unique selling points, if I may say so, is that, and this is also really deeply there in my populism course, is that I really dig deep into the contradictions of the existing world. So the populism is not only, or not even primarily, the cause of the political problems that we are facing today. We don't have inequalities or instability because of populism. We have populism because democracy as a system stopped working. So there is this crisis of liberal globalism and liberal democracy that we need to understand. So that's what I always try to do, and that's something that sometimes kind of pushes up against the time frame and the usual lens of journalists, in the media, and that's also something that the style of political science and political analysis shares with media, is a concentration on characters, on people, on figures, and then a moral basically analysis of what those people are doing. Trump is bad, I don't know, this guy is good. So that sort of, and then a focus on what those good or bad guys are doing, which is of course very important, but what really I want to do in these interviews, if I have the chance, is really go beyond that and understand why these people are on the scene in the first place. How did they get there? What are the factors? Are there maybe problems underlying that drive support for these people? Maybe these people are not right in what they're saying, but the existence of this phenomenon points to something that we should fix if we want to kind of rescue democracy for the future, or political stability more broadly speaking globally.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I've seen too many interviews where a political analyst gets cut off before they finish their sentence, and I'm like, wait, what are they trying to say? Please give them a chance.
I'm not sure if I really faced a situation where they were looking for specific answers. The problem is that they have specific questions, and the specific questions invite specific answers. And very often those questions are really about the here and now superficial aspects of politics. Mm-hmm. And I find the more deeper structure underlying historical bigger questions more relevant, and I think that's my role as well, as a scholar. I'm not there as a journalist, I'm there as a scholar to explain the bigger questions, and that's what I often get a note about a topic, like a brief topic statement, or sometimes even questions, but then those questions do not always work out the way they plan. There's always an element of surprise, and then sometimes you get questions where, oh wow, I wasn't really preparing for this question. And here I think it takes practice, to have kind of the routine to answer those questions without really coming across as completely unprepared or whatever, a fake person. Maybe politics helps there as well, because one thing that the media and politics have in common is that there is this need to be able to reflect on, react to basically everything. And when you're a politician, then you get asked questions about everything, and you need to have an opinion about everything. And I so enjoy it that now I'm an academic and I can say, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I try not to do that too often on TV. But I sometimes say, I don't know. We don't know. We need more time to figure this out. Whereas if you are in politics, that's not something necessarily that you like to do, or politicians don't do that too often. Maybe they should. Maybe people would believe them more.
I think that it's a question of simplification and making things relatable. So as much as possible, I try to make the technical speak simplified. So using analogies for things rather than, let's say, using units of measure of cubic meters of water. We can translate that into maybe swimming pools. Not necessarily sustainable things to use as a reference, but at least you can use a reference that people can relate to a little bit more easily. And I would actually say that what's interesting about being a hydrologist or an earth scientist that teaches courses in the School of Foreign Service is that the students are not going through, let's say, an engineering program or a science program. So in some ways, I'm actually getting much better at translating the technical into things that are relatable by teaching at Georgetown. That experience has been really, I love it. It's a lot of fun, and it really does challenge me quite a bit. I have a pretty technical background. I mean, I studied engineering. I have a PhD in a physical science. So I was really around mostly technical people for most of my career, definitely my education, but I always loved being able to translate these concepts into things that were relatable because I thought, I mean, I fell in love with the concepts because of what it meant for society, because of what we were actually able to do to improve people's lives, in very fundamental ways. It wasn't necessarily just the science or the math that I fell in love with. So for me, that's the thing that hooked me. And so actually finding ways of making it relatable to any kind of audience, whether it's students or it's at a conference or it's for the media. And you have different levels of media, of course, right? Depending on the country, depending on the type of outlet, it all needs to be kind of tweaked the way that you deliver the message. So it's something that there's a lot of time that needs to go into actually really delivering that message, refining it. Sometimes what you're going to say will fall short, frankly, and that's not a great feeling, especially when it comes to media and especially when there are really important things that you want to get across. When there's a conflict, of course, you want to do a good job of both delivering the message, but also making it engaging and having people really walk away with something. And some days it's just not going to work as well, for a whole number of reasons. Just like not every lecture is going to be the best lecture in the world. The students may not be as engaged. You may not be as engaged. I mean, all kinds of things. So I think it's also kind of just something that you practice, and you if it's something that you want to get better at, you kind of like improve your skills over time. I have friends that are journalists, so I do tend to actually, I've asked them for help in the past for things. I mean, if I have more time, I'll say, hey, what do you think about phrasing this particular concept in this way? And so they I think having a sounding board also really helps. But listen, in the end, we're not perfect. You're going to improve over time, and it is something that you practice. Yeah.
Do you feel the satisfaction when you give lectures to like go in depth with your topics?
Certainly, it's much more satisfying, yeah, because you control the situation more, and you can also pace it, right? So you can also work with we first lay the foundations, and then we talk about this, we talk about that. So that is, in that sense, more satisfying. Also, journalism, is a very specific type of job that faces its own challenges. Many journals or media outlets face extreme competition for people's attention. Profitability in especially in traditional print media is not really there anymore. Many journalists are time constrained, aren't necessarily earning really good money. So you're everyday journalist. I'm not talking about a host on MSNBC or whatever. And that means their energy that they can spend on preparing is not necessarily what it should be, and that can be frustrating. But it is what it is. So I'm sympathetic to these constraints to a large degree. Sometimes you see that it's just a journalist who's not interested really in the details. Just want because a lot of the things that you do is what is called these features, and sometimes I even talk with journalists for an hour, and then we would pick like a sentence, and they use you as a free source of knowledge, and then it's up to you to decide how much you want to do this. You want to build relations with journalists, right? So you don't want to say no all the time, but then it's also time consuming, So just this month I did 2 or 3 interviews like that. One landed with really 1 hour and then just one sentence inserted, but then the journalist was very happy. He was saying oh, this was so helpful for background information. I'm gonna come back to this later on for other pieces that I'm working on. But for this, I now have, I don't know, 500 words or 300 words for the total, and in that you will get 20 words, and that's your that's your spot. Yeah. So that happens sometimes. Even with or maybe even more so with the bigger ones, the more prestigious print ones. And then you have a journalist who just wants to get informed, and instead of going to the university to take a lecture, they just do it one-on-one.
I'm someone that's speaking about the environment, and I'm coming from a place that many people feel is contributing to things like climate change. Yeah, it's there. For me, it's not something that it's something I accept. It's not something that necessarily bothers me because I know why I'm there, and I know my North Star, and and I understand also the nuances of these things. That actually you can this work is impactful from every place in the world, and actually it's even more impactful when we talk about places like Qatar and what the country can actually do. I think it can do a lot. That's what really inspired me to want to come to the region, and especially to want to come to Qatar. It was just that I feel actually there's a lot that we can do, and we're given an important platform. We're given resources at times. There's a real desire to I really think on the environment side, there's a real desire to actually have impact, not just in the country itself, which definitely I think that's very genuine, but also across the region and globally. So that to me is, it's actually much more, I would say, empowering than something that that upsets me or that bothers me. And I think it's a fantastic way of also ensuring that you're presenting the right image of the country itself. And I think until you're there, it's really hard to actually know. I'd say probably from the outside, I had different perceptions than when I came and spent time in the country. So people will have opinions. I think they should, and I think they should challenge, and we should have a dialogue around these things. I don't get bothered by it at all.
Interesting combination that we have here, Georgetown, Qatar. So that's a mixture there that helps the Georgetown brand. But I would be lying if I said it had no impact at all. And interestingly, I think the biggest impact it had was in Hungary, and that is because Eastern Europe is in this very strange spot, still very much in the old Cold War kind of mindset, where East is bad, West is good, the US is always right. That's coming from kind of the state socialist era, and then the Middle East maps onto that, and it's East, Southeast versus the West, and then the West is always imagined in a civilizationally superior way, and that feeds into a lot of the prejudices and just also sheer ignorance. People have no idea, not just about the Gulf, but in general about they don't know anything about Morocco, they don't know anything about Tunisia, they don't know anything about Lebanon. So it's not just about the Gulf, but the broadly speaking, the MENA region. But Europe is very special in a sense that Europeans always feel entitled to judge. I haven't encountered that in other parts of the world, not even in the US. Some Americans do that, but at least me, maybe because I'm European and I interact more with kind of honest Europeans that way. But I think it's true that Europeans have this sense of entitlement to judge other people, and then they would pass judgment on all kinds of regions for all kinds of reasons. Those Chinese, they're just good at producing things, but it's us who do the innovation. All those people in the Gulf, they just like traditionalist, whatever, deeply conservative, and they hate women by definition, and they just also anti-Semites by definition. So that's something that is there in not everyone's head, but it's a detectable current, and that also influences me. And if I may add, there was a specific instance when there was a historian, an Israeli historian, who gave a talk at a Hungarian university, or tried to give a talk. And there are very few Palestinians in Hungary, very, very few. In general, Arabic minority, or broadly speaking, like kind of Islamic minority in Hungary is just like very small. The one that is there, mostly Turkish people, are not politically organized. It's just like whatever, trade or do operate restaurants, or it's not an organized or vocal minority. But there were these few students who kind of went there and loudly debated this idea of having this lecture, which was about basically was a soft version of this typical Israeli far-right narratives, where Israel is a democracy, a diverse society, and an inclusive society versus the rest, the surrounding sea of whatever barbarism, you know. And these young people were like, no, I'm not going to allow you to kind of just talk like this and peddle those narratives. So they blocked the lecture, and there was a huge outcry against that in the country. The government that was still Viktor Orbán kind of commented on it, that this is unacceptable. And they went after the stipends, the scholarship of some of those young people. And mind you, this is a country where demonstrations that involved anything related to Palestine were banned. You could, even if you were saying, I'm protesting for the peaceful coexistence of Palestinians and Israelis, it involved Palestine, you can't do that. So there's an extreme kind of repression of that kind of speech. And in this context, and we are talking about a country that cooperates with Israeli military industry. We are talking about a country whose government is using Israeli security software, spyware. So, you know, there's a massive kind of entanglement there. So in this context, these young people, completely disenfranchised discursively and in other ways, blocked the presentation. And then the government, which was a far-right government at that point, plus a large part of the style liberal audience, also went after these few young people, saying that this is whatever, anti-Semitic, fascism, cancel culture, whatever. And at that point, I just wrote an article saying in one of these local progressive online outlets, explaining that this kind of action can be interpreted as a civil disobedience. And even if it goes against the law, sometimes the moral situation is such that you have to do things that confront power and might be even illegal, and then you have to face the consequences. That is civil disobedience. And you could, this has history. Blocking university buildings has history in the United States, not just in the context of the current genocide, but historically speaking. And that created a huge kind of debate. There was, we have a Jewish university in the country, and the head of one of the departments was responding to me, and of course Qatar came up there. And then I would get these things, okay, Qatar speaking. So that sort of thing, that exists.
It's more important that they kind of get the questions right, I'd say. Probably the kind of questions. And then sometimes if the questions are not really being asked in the right way, I think that's an opportunity for you to course correct a bit. So I'd say, the labels are not hugely bothersome to me. It's in the end, it's just more so about what you're saying. And actually, I want to go back for a minute about you said something about media training. And it's true, we don't necessarily get media training, but actually because I back when I was working in the US federal government and within the science community, at least in the US when I was there, we do get quite a number of opportunities, and I've gotten these opportunities to actually get formal and informal training, which is really nice. I would love to see something like that in the region. And actually, we should have more programs like this. I remember there was one, there's a program for mass media training that was targeting scientists. And it was a formal program. You had to actually apply, you had to get in. That would give you training to, you would intern at a news outlet, whether it could be something like National Geographic, or it could be something like the New York Times. So it was really a big range of where you would end up. And so I think formal programs like that are really fantastic, because we did realize back, I don't know, before your time, before you were studying at Georgetown, some years ago, when people started to really try to mass communicate things around the environment, around climate change, we realized the importance of actually getting that language right, because there was so much politicizing of these things, and it was really hijacking the science and making it something sometimes way bigger than it needed to be. And so I think there was this kind of collective consciousness within the scientific community that we need to do a better job of communicating. And what that means is also giving opportunities to scientists to be part of the journalistic world. But in order to do that well, you need training. Like, we're not trained for this, definitely in the sciences and engineering programs. So I'd say, yeah, I think these are fantastic opportunities for us. I think it's fantastic for students that choose to do this, to practice these skills like you. I know you're not a student anymore, but you were until recently. I think as much as you can just jump in and practice these things, find the platforms, get the messages out. It's so important. Even if you're not necessarily tomorrow going to be speaking, I don't know, with Al Jazeera or with the BBC or whoever, that take the opportunities, learn how to communicate to various audiences, and then when you have those chances to speak to bigger audiences and like get your message out, then you'll be proud of your ability to be able to really make a contribution. Because I'd say, like, honestly, in the end, it's not really about us as individuals anyway. It's it's a bit of a feel-good message, but it's a responsibility we have to our field, and to really, like, these topics that especially like the faculty at GUQ work on are so important. I mean, and they're such experts in these areas. I mean, I'm like very proud to even be considered, among them. But it's so important for us to get it right, and to be given these spaces to speak to the public and to speak at these platforms. It's fantastic, but it's also a big responsibility. So I think, yeah, definitely, as much as we can, hone those skills and have more opportunities, the better. And the same with the students.
Believe in dialogue and speaking across differences. Even though I have very strong opinion on certain things, I do believe that most of us live in small subcultures, and things, the biggest problems that society and humanity faces will require us cooperating across subcultures. And if we only focus on our subculture, on our moral high ground, then we lose the opportunity to talk to other subcultures. And you do that by kind of softening the moral identity, cultural language, and kind of trying to see the other's point of view as well.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of GUQ Speaks. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspirations from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow us on our Instagram page at GUQ_speaks, and be sure to leave a review on Spotify to show your support.